so good and such a blessing to be able to stand before you again at this time, that we can search more about what the Scriptures has to say, especially in our series of what gets us into trouble. And I do appreciate this opportunity that you have given to me, that I can be able to stand before you and proclaim God's Word. And as I strive to do at every opportunity, if you hear anything that you read differently in the Scriptures that is contrary to what I say up here, please come and let's study it together. As it is not only my goal, but I know your goal as well, that we get to heaven. And that is so important. But to start us off, I'd like us to go back to James chapter 3. As it was very gracious to be able to read that in the Scripture reading this morning, James chapter 3, I'd like us to look at verses 1 through 12. James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. And I will be reading out of the New King James Version throughout my lessons, so I might say something a little tiny bit differently in your version if you read from something differently. But this is what I will be reading out of through the course of this series. Starting in James chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, and is set on fire by the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." Now, of course, I know you would not want to call your attention to yourself by walking out and going home before I really got started. But let me say this. This sermon may not apply to you. But let me explain first. If you have never said something unkind, this sermon may not apply to you. Well, if you have never told a lie, you can probably go on home and be safe by now. Well, if you have never also insulted someone, never spoken a vile word, never used inappropriate language, never engaged in gossip or slander or talebearing, then you could probably safely ignore this lesson. But behold, you are all still here. And I'm still here. As I said this morning, these lessons are not just for you. They're for me likewise. Because all of us, preacher or no preacher, elder or no elder, deacon or no deacon, we all are still human, and we all can still make mistakes. You are still here, and I am still here, because we are convicted by the passage that we just read together in James 3. At least with reference to some previous misuse of our tongue. And if we are wise and we are humble, we recognize that in the future we may face the same temptation. So what are we going to do about it? Maybe we are also still here because we continue to realize an ongoing failure in our speech. And we are here because we believe what James said was right when he says we all stumble. And we take him seriously in these words, that no man can tame the tongue. So I hope that we are all here ready to study this passage because we know this is what we need. Though it may be plausibly argued that some need this more than others, there is no question that each of us needs this teaching to find a permanent place in our character. So let's consider then James chapter 3. Even if you could argue that you have never sinned with your tongue, surely you are open to the possibility that you may be tempted in some time in the future. So this is the second lesson in our series of what gets us into trouble, what gets us into sin. And we used Scripture last time to address the idea of our thoughts that might get us into trouble. And when left with this assurance that this morning we will take on this unruly tongue. So whatever it is that gets you into trouble, we need to let the Word of God expose that sin and let the blood of Christ cleanse you of that sin. And let the preaching and teaching of the Word keep you from sins of the heart or the tongue for that matter. Now, while most of our time this morning will be set in the 3rd chapter of James, I want to actually start first earlier in James chapter 1 and verse 26. I want to start by referring to something here in the 1st chapter of James chapter 1 and verse 26. Take these words to heart. He says, "If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless." Now notice here, if you will, this does not say if you cannot bridle your tongue. This says if you do not bridle your tongue. There's a vast difference between those two things. What is strongly implied is that we have the capacity to control what we say, to control what comes out of our mouth. I've heard countless times people make the argument saying, "Well, Drew, I just can't control what comes out of my mouth." Well, either this passage is telling the truth or you're telling the truth, but both can't be true. And if we hold that God is right, well, clearly that's not true. That you can control what you say. What comes out of your mouth is controlled by you. Whether we like that or not, that is the truth of the matter. Because we may not bridle the tongue, but the Bible teaches us that we can. We have the capacity to do so. Now notice, there's a difference between having the capacity and doing it. We might have the ability, but do we use it? But this is right. You can bridle the tongue, and I can bridle mine. But if we don't, there are two things here that we see. If we don't bridle the tongue, there are two things. I apologize, this thing is not proceeding. Well, we'll continue on likewise. There are two things. One, that we deceive our own heart when we do not bridle our tongue. And two, when we don't bridle our tongue, what does it say? Our religion is useless. Let that sink in. Our religion is useless. Here we go. Here's the two facts of the matter in this verse. Now, your religion may appear to be well established in terms of knowledge. You may be very generous. You may use your talents in the service of the kingdom. You may shun immoral conduct. You may even show some leadership ability. But the truth stated by James here is if you do not bridle your tongue, you deceive your own heart and your religion is useless. This one verse has quite an impact on us, doesn't it? This one verse has quite an impact on us. As it says, the Bible is telling us failure in this area makes our religion useless in every area. That is what this verse right here implies right here. This is what it tells us. And this is a strong argument. It should get our attention. It should open our eyes. It should cause us to stop and to think before we speak. Sadly, I think it's the opposite way around for many people. They think after they speak. And they say all kinds of choice words and things that later they go, I shouldn't have said that. That should not have come off my tongue. That should not be what exited my lips. But sadly, that realization came too late in that scenario. It should stop, think, and speak. And if we are presently guilty, it should cause us to confess that sin as openly as necessary to clear the air and ask God's forgiveness. Sadly, though, there are many people who believe that speech does not mean much and that what they say doesn't mean much. That being the case, let's go back to James chapter 3. And James has for those who may have trouble with the sins of the tongue here. And it is my assumption that to some extent every one of us may have a problem with this, at least at some point in our life. So let's begin. First of all, why does James single out teachers? I say, James, you're getting a little picky on teachers, aren't you? Well, look at James chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. So teachers, let's think about teachers for that moment. Teachers, it is by the very nature of their work to speak, to use their words. They use their mouths. Teachers probably speak more than those who are not in some sort of teaching capacity. So James is saying, knowing there is a danger of misspeaking, don't just jump into a work that involves speaking, especially if you have a problem with your mouth. Go into the work with a sober sense of the accountability that is assigned to that work. This is not intended as well as a discouragement from the work of teaching. Rather, it is it is to emphasize the care that is to be exercised because teachers use words. Teachers speak quite a bit. Sometimes you go, when is he ever going to stop talking? But teachers speak quite a bit. Because then James writes with an all-inclusive language. In James chapter 3 and verse 2, he says, For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Now, you know what strikes me here? That this is one of those statements in the New Testament that stands strongly against the self-righteous spirit. The boastful spirit of self-elevation and self-importance that would make people say things like, I don't have any problem with that. You know what? That just does not apply to me because I never make any mistake in those regards. That is a boastful, haughty, prideful, self-righteous spirit talking. But James here makes the humble statement, we all stumble. No one is immune from sin. You'll even hear some people say, I know plenty of people who sin with their tongue, but not me. You won't hear a single thing ever for as long as I live leave these lips that would be sinful. That person's just waiting to fall. That pride and haughty arrogance has no place in our hearts. That kind of conceit will put us off guard and open our hearts to attack by the devil. It truly will. We need to see ourselves in this admonition that we all stumble in many things. And this fact should drive us to our knees daily, confessing those things which we have wrong, our sins, asking for forgiveness, expressing to the Lord our desire to both identify and expel our evil thoughts and clean up our sinful speech. As we talked about this morning with Job, Job had the humble attitude that he wants to know all of his sins, his transgressions. Well, why is that? So they can be exposed and fixed. Look at the latter half of James 3 and verse 2. It says, if anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. I have a question. Do you know that man? Do you know the perfect man in which we see James talking about here? Well, are you acquainted with the person who has everything in control all of the time, both in their heart and their tongue? There is not a single misstep that they've ever made? Well, I can tell you, I only know of one such man. That's Jesus the Christ. But after him, I don't know anyone else that would fit that description of perfect in heart and tongue. All of the other people I know need help. Even the best men and women that I know need help. So let's begin this study of James 3 knowing that this does apply to each and every one of us. Knowing that we need to stay here and listen and learn, teachers especially, but we all stumble for that matter. Let's take in this teaching and try to do better. So we see three illustrations used by James. First, we see the small bit to move that horse. Now, out here, you guys might know much more than back in California what a bit is. Because in California, you don't see a horse too often unless you go out into the farmland. But out in Texas, I see horses all the time, and I love horses. But y'all probably know what a bit is. And just that little tiny bit right up there is what controls that big, strong, and sometimes very self-willed horse. Do you see how little that bit is? Or even the little rudder. Have you guys ever seen any of those large ships? Those big tanker ships? Or even the big cruise ships? You see how massive these ships are. They are extremely impressive. But then you look at what turns it, and in proportion to that ship, it's this big. In proportion to that ship, it's this big. But yet it turns that massive ship. We even see a small fire that causes great damage. You know, in California, we are eminently aware with fires. We get fires every year and sometimes burns an incredible amount of area. But you know how those fires start, right? Not some great meteor that comes from the sky and burns up a whole area. No, they generally start from a little ember from a stray campfire that wasn't properly put out, or a few sparks from a truck as it's going down the road dragging the chains. Those little tiny sparks, little fire, can burn thousands, tens of thousands, and even at times hundreds of thousands of acres. I know of a fire not that long ago near my hometown that burned over 290,000 acres of land. That's a whole lot of land. Do you know how it started? A little campfire that wasn't put out correctly. That's all it took. That's all it took. No such commentary and no much more commentary is required here because we realize that these illustrations match so well the lesson to be learned. That the tongue is a relatively small member of the human body, but think of what great influence that little thing can have, both for good and for evil. The small bit, the small rudder, and the small fire. You know, I want us to clearly understand that the potential of something is not necessarily proportional to its size. Don't think that because the tongue is small in size, that it's small in potential. You know, the illustrations are written by James to get us to think about what great potential there is in this little member of the human body, the tongue. James chapter 3 and verse 5, as it says there, so even the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. You know, James there in verse 6 now relies upon the same illustration to segue into his next point, where he says, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. Just think now of the tongue as a fire, but not in the good sense. Rather, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so situated in your body that your whole life can be negatively affected by a few careless words. I know of an example of a brother who did not have control of his tongue, and he lost his job over a few choice words. A job that he relied upon to take care of his family. All it took was a few choice words. Our tongue can do much good, but it can also do much evil. You know, how many bloody noses, how many black eyes, how many broken bones have been the result of a few insulting words that were spoken from a mouth? Your mouth can get you into a lot of trouble. There is always the danger of putting your tongue into high gear before your brain is even turned on. Remember, as we talked about before, we need to think before we speak, not the other way around. Don't speak and then think, because then you'll have a whole headache worth of what you just spoke. Have you guys been to a zoo recently? Over where I live, the San Diego Zoo is a wonderful zoo with many exotic animals. And those animals are under control as a general rule. They stay in their places, they know their boundaries, and they don't seem to bother each other very much. They also don't generally attack visitors or staff. But what you observe in the zoo are tamed animals. And it's about training and control. They didn't just put them in a cage one day and say, have at it. Because if they did that, then every time that the people came in to feed them, it wouldn't be what's in the bucket for dinner. It would be the thing that walked in. It's about training and control. So now, think about that. Listen now to James chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. It says, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Let's think about this verse here. Animals we can control. But that little tiny tongue, we have quite a bit of control, or quite a bit of trouble controlling. An unruly evil full of deadly poison. I would like, if you would indulge me, to read from a commentary on this passage that I think puts it into a very good perspective of what we're talking about here. This comes from the Pulpit Commentary, if you'd like to look it up for yourself. But it starts off, it says, we have here a fourfold classification of the inferior creatures. God gave man dominion over them at creation, and it imitated his supremacy anew after the flood. There is no variety of brute nature that has not yielded in the past and does not continue to yield to the lordship of human nature. The horse, the dog, the elephant, the lion, the leopard, the tiger, the hyena, the partridge, the falcon, the eagle, the viper, the cobra, the crocodile. These names suggest ample evidence of man's power to tame the most diverse species of wild animals. But, says James, there is one little creature which human nature in its own strength finds it impossible to domesticate. The tongue of man is fiercer than the most ferocious beast. The rebellion of our race against good is far more inveterate than any subordination of the brutes. Indeed, the revolt of the lower creatures against the authority of man is only the shadow and symbol of man's revolt against the authority of God. Year by year, man is subduing the earth and extending its dominion over it, but his natural power to govern the tongue remains as feeble as it was in the days of Cain. This little member reveals the appalling depths of human corruption. It goes on to say it is a restless evil, unstable, fickle, versatile, even ever stirring about from one form of unrighteousness to another, assuming protean shapes and chameleon hues, its words sometimes filthy, sometimes slanderous, sometimes profane, sometimes angry, sometimes idle, and the untamed tongue is full of deadly poison. It is a worse poison bag than that of the most hurtful serpent. The words of a false tongue are fangs of mortal venom, for which no human skills can supply an antidote. And I think he really hits the point as he makes this. He says, by our own power. Now, many read this and they say, well, there's no way that I can control my tongue. See, as it says here. But many people forget the point as they read this. Who do we need? God. How can we overcome sin? God. Without God, you're not going to be able to have that self-control. With God, however, it becomes more than possible. It becomes needed. Because then we see our inconsistency. We see our inconsistency. James chapter 3, verses 9 through 11. Speaking about the tongue here, James chapter 3, 9 through 11. It says, with it, that is our tongue, we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Here, James exposes our inconsistency. The inconsistency here is using your tongue to bless God and with that same tongue curse men who have been made in the image of God. The inconsistency is out of the same mouth. There are contradictory messages. You're saying bless God, love God, serve God, and then out of that same mouth, you're cursing men. Contradictory messages coming out of here. And this reminds us of a passage that who we really are inside, in our thought, in our heart, comes out in our speech. Let's turn to Luke 6 and verse 45. Luke 6 and verse 45. Here in Luke chapter 6, it tells us, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. Jesus didn't mince words when it came to what is inside the man and what comes out of the man. Jesus didn't make it very confusing in any regard. What is in our heart is what will come out of our mouth. You know, I appreciate the song that was led before the lesson here. That was number 454. As it says in verses 2 and 3, When somebody has been so unkind to you, some word spoken that pierces you through and through. Words matter. Or verse 3, from the dawn of the morning till close of day, an example in deeds and in all you say. Lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. Now, when we are speaking words that are not befitting a Christian, are we letting the beauty of Jesus be seen in us? Well, the answer would be no. The answer would be no. And we are to sing with the Spirit and sing with the understanding. Are we really singing words that we believe? Well, if we believe these words which we just sang, are we letting the beauty of Jesus be seen in our speech? I'd like us to consider 3 things that we need to learn from this lesson. First of all, your tongue cannot please God until your heart pleases God. You may recall the substance of the sermon this morning, that conduct is heart-centered. The heart is in the spiritual sense, the unseen mental part of us that is the seat of all our conduct. You may remember Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. Let's refresh ourselves of this passage. In Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23, the writer of wisdom says here, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Do you know what this includes? Our speech, our tongue. This includes what we say or don't say at times. The first step in conquering any outward conduct is the inner man. Devote your heart to God. Let the Word of God find its place in your heart, in your mind. In that inner purity, you discover outer purity. Your tongue cannot please God until your heart pleases God. Jesus said, quoting from the Old Testament, in Matthew chapter 22 and verse 37, Matthew 22 and verse 37, Jesus, quoting here from the Old Testament, says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This passage right here is where we begin to control the tongue. But Drew, tongue isn't even said in this passage. It doesn't need to say anything about the tongue because it's referring to the inner man in which the tongue speaks from. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Look with me, if you will, to Psalm 19 as well, verse 14. Psalm chapter 19 and verse 14. The psalmist speaking here as well to this idea, where he says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. We cannot expect our mouth to be pure, to be acceptable to God, until our heart is right and acceptable to God. How many of you take a pan that you cook with, and you cooked with it, right? It was clean and you made it dirty on the inside, and then you go to wash it and you turn the pan over and you just wash the bottom. What good is that going to do? It's not going to make the food clean inside. Well, it might look shiny on the outside, but the inside's still dirty. Clean the inside so that what comes out of that pan isn't rancid or disgusting. This needs to be right so that this can be right. Second, let each of us take a no compromising stand about how we use our tongues. Generally, we do not hear people using vulgar language when we come to the church building or in social settings with other Christians. But the temptation comes when we are with those who are not serving God. When we are amongst those who are not Christians in the neighborhood or in our workplaces, in secular settings. To fit in, we may be tempted to speak the language that others are speaking. Unfortunately, some compromise in those settings and those pressures they fall to. They compromise and they say, well, I'm in this setting, and so I don't look like the outcast, so I don't look like the weirdo. I'm going to engage in that kind of speech. Use kinds of vulgar language and things that we ought not be having out of our mouth. We need to take a no compromise setting. What we ought to do is make up our minds that we will not compromise our speech in any setting. As we just talked about that song which we just sang, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. How can you be letting the beauty of Jesus be seen in you when you're compromising with the world? You can't. You can't. There's not a single valid argument that would make me ever think otherwise. No matter what kind of language others use around us, we need to make up our minds, I will not partake in this. And regardless of who we are with and what setting is, or who is listening for that matter, what is crucial is a no compromise stand concerning the use of our tongues. In Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6, Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6, we are told, let your speech always be made with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Now, I'd like us to turn to a passage which sadly I think many don't read or gloss over. That's in Matthew chapter 12. Starting at verse 33. We'll be reading through verses 33 through 37. And I apologize, I don't have that on the chart here, but I hope that you can write it down, or if you need the verse afterwards, I'm sure I can be obliged to give it to you. But Matthew chapter 12, verses 33 through 37. Let's read this together. It says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. Now pay attention, these last two verses of what Jesus just said, and now as he will say it. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. I bring this up because sadly, I've heard quite often people say, well, it doesn't really matter what I say. It doesn't really matter what I say. Or even if I say it in a less offensive way, we call those things euphemisms. Doesn't really matter. You know, if I'm saying it in a nicer way, then it doesn't matter. But is that what this verse here says? That our words don't matter? That in fact our words are only if they're intentional, right? Then they start to matter. But what does Jesus say But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak. This is including intentional or not. This is if you say, oh, I meant to say that, or I didn't mean to say that. Everything that comes out of these lips, you will be judged. Do you see that? These are Jesus' words, not mine. Do you realize that euphemisms are man's way of softening things that are vulgar and sinful? We talk about taking the Lord's name in vain. When people say, oh my God, they're taking the Lord's name in vain. But do you realize that you're saying the exact same thing when you say, oh my gosh? Or even when you say, oh my goodness. And that's not me. You can go look that up in the dictionary. Man's own dictionary says that these things are euphemisms for oh my God. And you can look up all different kinds of euphemisms. I won't go through them here because the list, sadly, is very long. But we need to think before we speak. You might say, Drew, I've been saying that my whole life. Drew, I've spoken like this, or I've used things that are, I never think anything of them, right? One, every idle word, as we just pointed out. But two, let me put it to you this way. I know several people where English is not their first language. Now, what happens if you say something? You say a euphemism for something else, and you've never thought anything of it. You say, well, that's not really what I'm meaning to say when I say it. But what happens with that man who is learning the English language, goes to the dictionary and looks up, oh, what is he saying? And then you go, oh, he's saying this, so that's okay to say? Because, of course, this man is supposed to be, or woman, is supposed to be letting the beauty of Jesus be seen in them. Is supposed to be living a life true and pure according to the Word of God. And this is the speech that they're using? Okay, well, I guess it's okay to use then. And then they start using the real thing. You go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why are you saying those kind of things? And then they turn back around and say, well, you said the same thing. You said the same thing. I've been called someone who's a nitpicker and someone who's just trying to make everyone stop speaking altogether. And of course, neither of these things are true. I'm trying to help us realize that the things that come out of this mouth are more than just blah, blah, blah. Everything we say is either to the glory of God or it's blaspheming God. We are either serving God and letting the beauty of Jesus be seen in our speech, or we are letting the world say, I'm just like one of you. What we say is important. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As I said, this is not my opinion on the matter. This is Jesus' words on the matter. Take it up with God if you have a problem. Take it up with God. Because the third of the points I wanted to make is I want us to go back to James 1, verse 26. James 1 and verse 26, and don't worry, I'm almost done. You don't have to suffer me much longer here. James chapter 1 and verse 26. We read it again as it says, if anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Now, some translations, as you might be reading it, says vain. This one's religion is vain or vanity. That means of no value, useless, worthless. James, Jesus, they don't pull punches. They don't hold back from speaking the truth. The truth is, if we do not control our speech, we can't expect people to learn about God. We can't. Why? Because our religion, worthless, useless, vanity. Even though we may think we are religious, if we neglect to bridle the tongue, James says our religion is useless. We all need to seriously take hold of this warning here. Remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 12. Remember the words of James here in James chapter 1, James chapter 3. Remember that this little tiny thing sitting in this little mouth of ours can condemn us or can justify us, as we read in Matthew 12 there, verse 37. The last time we considered our heart and our thoughts, and right now the tongue. And Lord willing, this evening we will consider the world. So what gets us into trouble? What gets you into trouble? The trouble of sin. Whatever your individual struggle, whatever your individual weakness or your sin is, it doesn't have to send you to an eternal punishment, because Christ died for us. Coming to Him, we can receive the forgiveness, and not only that, the power to live righteously and the power to control our tongues. I hope that this lesson has been beneficial to each and every one of us. As I've said now, and I've said before, and I will continue to say, these lessons are just as much for me as it is for every one of us. We all stumble, as James just spoke about. We all have things that get us into trouble. But instead of wallowing in the mire, or instead of saying, woe is me, and doing nothing about it, let's expose that which gets us into trouble and do something about it. Let us fix the problem that we find instead of ignoring it and leaving it alone. Let's do something about the things that get us into trouble. But of course, we never end any part without the invitation of the Lord. Because after we have heard the Word, that is the Word of life, the Word of God, and we believe with our heart, we have faith that is predicated on that Word, and we repent, that is, turning our life away from a life of sin to a life of Christ, and confessing with the mouth that Jesus is the Lord, Jesus is the Son of God. Don't stop there, though. Then be baptized for the remission of sins into Christ. Do not let anyone tell you that anything less than that will garner you salvation, because the Scriptures are quite clear. And after being baptized, don't end there either. As Revelation 2 and verse 10 tells us, be faithful until death, and you will receive the crown of life. If that is your need at this time, do not wait another second. Do not wait any second. Because every second that you wait is another second that your life may come to a close. Before I end, I'll leave you with one last idea. I had a friend in high school. He was 18 at the time. He turned 19 over the course of the 6-month period. When he was 18, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. At 18 years old, he thought he had his whole life in front of him, as if everything was going to go his way. And within the diagnosis of his stage 4 cancer, 6 months later, he passed away. He turned 19 just before he passed away. Now, to all of you young people, and of course you might say I'm a young person, but to all you who are younger than me, I'll say, or even my age, do not ever think that you have all the time in the world. Because you don't. You don't. You may live to the ripe old age of 80 or 90 or even 100 maybe. Wonderful. But you may not live very long at all either. I don't say this to necessarily scare you. I say this to make sure that we all have the understanding that this life is not forever. Every year that we live, we gain a greater understanding of that concept. That this life is not forever. Remember that. Make the choice, if need be for you, to obey the gospel, to come to Jesus. Do not ever let a moment pass in which you don't think about Christ. This life is too short for that. This life is too short to miss it all. Think seriously. If this be your need, if this be what you need to do to be right by God, to become a Christian this very hour, we are more than happy to assist you in becoming one. Or if you are also a Christian who's allowed sin to take a hold on your life, do not let that continue. Pray to the Lord. Ask Him for forgiveness and do it no more. Make that commitment. I will live for Jesus. And if you are in the need of the prayers of your brethren, we are more than happy to pray with you and for you. There is no shame in admitting wrong to do better. The shame is when we see the wrong and do nothing about it. Your brethren are here with you, for you. That's what brethren are here for. We love each other. We want each other to go to heaven. Think seriously. If either of these be subject to you, would you come forward as we stand and as we sing?